What is up, everybody? Welcome to Water Cooler Talk. My name is Caleb Turner, and I'm a sports writer at KSL.com. We are officially into the month of November here in Utah in the world of sports, and we're here to break it all down for you to let you know what to talk about with your friends, with your family, coworkers, around the water cooler, and wherever else these fun sports talks may take place. Going to start out with a bit of a recap of what went down this last week in the world of sports here in Salt Lake and roundabouts areas, beginning with soccer. Like I promised you, I've been saying soccer's coming to an end for a while now. Well, it is officially over as of last night, Saturday night. Um, RSL and the Utah Royals are both done with their 2024 seasons. The Royals went out first. They had their final regular season game on Friday at America First Field in Sandy. They lost 4-1 to Gotham FC, the reigning champions of the NWSL. So obviously a lopsided loss there. But maybe feel a little bit better once you know that it's a team that's, in the top three in the entire league and projected to maybe, be a favorite to repeat there for the trophy. It was funny, however, after the game, head coach Jimmy Coonratz, who I believe I mentioned last week, got the full-time job as the Utah Royals coach. Coached a few years in women's soccer in his native Belgium, and he said this 4-1 loss was actually the worst loss of his entire coaching career, albeit not a very long coaching career, but still the worst. So if 4-1 is his worst, and the Royals had a couple losses that were even worse than that earlier on in the season, I think they're in pretty good hands as far as expectations and standards for a head coach go there. So Utah Royals season comes to an end. They did not make the playoffs, and they're in the regular season, and they'll be back for 2025. Real Salt Lake, however, on the other hand, did make the playoffs, but for the third year in a row, eliminated in the first round of the MLS Cup playoffs. This time just in two games. With the new format in MLS, the first round of the playoffs is a best of three series. RSL lost the first two games against Minnesota. First one at home, second one on the road last night in St. Paul, Minnesota. Both games came down to penalties, and RSL couldn't figure out that shootout. Couldn't figure out the penalties. In fact, missed three in a row last night to finally become eliminated from the playoffs. Like I mentioned, third year in a row, not making it past the first round. This year, I think, especially disappointing for many fans, as RSL did finish, top three in the Western Conference, had an MVP candidate in Chicho Arango for a lot of the season. So to go out the way they did, I should say, is quite disappointing. We'll have a chance over the next couple days to chat with some of the players, both RSL and the Royals, in their exit interviews as they prepare to go home for the off season. They first will have interviews both with with their coaches and stuff, and then also with media. So hopefully, kind of find out some more, maybe what went wrong there for RSL, but they're done. Soccer season's officially over, so you won't have to hear me talk too much more about soccer for the rest of the year, probably. So there's that. Um, and moving on to a little bit of hockey. The hockey club did end up breaking their four-game losing streak. They got a 5-1 win against the Calgary Flames this past week, and then went on to get another overtime loss, 4-3 to the Vegas Golden Knights in Las Vegas. So they've had a couple of these, potentially budding rivalry games in the last few weeks against the Colorado Avalanche and the Las Vegas Golden Knights. So interesting to see if those really turn into something. Both games, their Avalanche game was not as competitive. Knights game pretty competitive going to OT. So we'll see what they can do there. And lastly, for the final of our recaps from the week, taking a look at the Utah Jazz. Um, Still haven't won a game. um, Utah 0-6 to start the NBA season. The Jazz have the worst record in the NBA at the moment, as we are here in early November. Still early, but I'll have more on that later on in a special segment dedicated to the Utah Jazz and their 0-6 start. So stay tuned for that. And as we turn to this upcoming week in our look ahead, big news as we enter November. entering winter. We already have the NBA, and there's even more basketball on the way for my hoops lovers. College basketball is officially here this week. We've got several programs here in the state of Utah: Utah State, Weber State, University of Utah, BYU, and both men's and women's teams at all of those schools. So a lot of basketball coming up here. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you've got games for all three of the major programs: Utah State, Utah, and BYU. So it should be fun there. Each program very unique, brings something very different, but have at least been fun, somewhat competitive in the last couple years. Utah State always with their new and upcoming coach. We'll see what they can do again this year after having another coach leave for a bigger program. Utah still trying to figure things out. They will start out play in the Big 12 this year, and then BYU second year in the Big 12. The big news for BYU is the recruits under new head coach Kevin Young. They've had a couple potential NBA prospects in Igor Demin and young man Catchings, who have been shown out in the early exhibition games for the Cougars. So we'll get the first look at them in official competition this week. Obviously, very early on with not so serious competition, possibly in these kind of non-conference preseason type games, but college basketball nonetheless. So something to look forward to there as we enter this week. Next up, Utah Hockey Club and the Jazz both taking road trips, leaving the state of Utah, giving Delta Center employees a break this week after what I'm sure has been a fun and exciting somewhat, but also very stressful last month or so as they've had to flip-flop back from ice to hardwood basketball court, back and forth, concerts in the middle of those as well. So I'm sure they'll be glad to have a bit of a break this week as both hockey and the Jazz go on the road. Hockey Club traveling to Winnipeg, St. Louis, and Nashville. Jazz also heading up north and east a little bit, taking on the Chicago Bulls, Milwaukee Bucks, and then going down to San Antonio for a second game against the Spurs. Just in the span of a week, they lost to the Spurs this week. This past week, Victor Wembanyama, that is, had a 5-by-5 game, which is known as when a player gets five or more of five stats. So like Wembanyama had like 5 blocks, 5 steals, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, and at least 5 points. And only the third player in NBA history to have that in multiple games over their career. So very impressive. A fun fact, though, another one of those three players is former Jazz player Andrei Kirilenko. So kind of a cool connection there. It happened against the Jazz for Wembanyama, and the Jazz had one of those types of players as well a few years back in Kirilenko that would gobble up those different types of stats, steals, rebounds, assists, whatever it might be, helping all over the court to hopefully get their team the win. And as I mentioned, a little more on the Jazz to come here in the program. But lastly, as we finish up our look ahead for this week, couple big college football games, namely Holy War, Utah versus BYU, whatever you want to call it. It's going down this Saturday at Rice-Eccles Stadium, November 9th. It'll be a big one. Not as big as maybe some might have anticipated earlier in this season when the two teams were winning more. Utah has dropped 4-4 on the season. BYU 8-0. So very different records at this point. So BYU is favored in that game, even though it is on the road here in Salt Lake City. I believe last I checked, it was a 4.5 point favorite for BYU. So a little more than a field goal. But we'll see. As we get closer, see what the teams are looking like, injury reports, etc., all that. See who's actually going to be matching up against each other. Isaac Wilson, going against the alma mater of his older brother, Zach Wilson. See, maybe what he missed out on by not going to Provo. Jake Retzlaff, quarterback down there for the Cougars. So should be a fun one. Once again, that's this Saturday. And also on Saturday, Utah State traveling to Washington State as the Aggies look to continue improving on their season after having 6 losses in a row. They were able to get a win last time out and hopefully keep some things going on the road there against Wazoo. So that's it for our look ahead. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit winners and losers. It's a little bit specific, I guess, maybe a little even repetitive this time, but it all has to do with the Utah Jazz. Considering, you know, last place in the NBA standings at the moment. Kind of gotta have to talk about it. Haven't been able to get a win yet. Lauri Markkanen has had some injuries, back spasms, and some of the younger players have really been thrust in. They've, started two or more rookies at times in that starting lineup. Um, so some chances for young guys, but also chances for growth moments, as maybe we can call them, where trial by fire, having to figure out things on the fly. And so far, it hasn't really worked. They haven't been able to get the win. However, in our winners and losers, to get down to it, winner for this week is if you are one of those fans that want Utah to get a high draft pick this year. For example, if you want Cooper Flagg, the Duke University superstar, projected to go number one in the 2025 NBA draft, your odds are looking pretty good. You're feeling pretty good as a Jazz fan right now if you want a good draft pick because, as of right now, they have the best draft lottery odds out of any team. Obviously, with some of the rule changes that have happened, technically the bottom three records all have the same odds to get the number one pick. Nonetheless, that's where you want to be. You want to have the best odds, and the Jazz are doing that right now. They're they are losing games, and losing games is what it takes to get a high draft pick. Now, on the other side of things, we for our loser this weekend, you might say, well, Jazz fans and players could also be losers in this situation. Obviously, sports teams want to win. Players, more than anything, competitive athletes want to win games. So I imagine it's got to be tough for some of these players, especially some of the more experienced ones. You look at guys like Jordan Clarkson, you look at guys like Colin Sexton, who are having to go through this as well, that probably don't want to be losing a lot of games at this point in their career. And for Jazz fans as well, going to these games, I'm sure it's not fun to watch your home team lose a game. So it's kind of inherent there in the name of this category, the loser. Jazz are losing games, have lost six in a row. So got to hand it to them there, unfortunately, at this moment. And a little bit of stock up, stock down as we kind of finalize things here. Jazz lottery odds are way up. Buying in on Jazz getting a high draft pick, potentially being in this capture the flag, Cooper Flag sweepstakes. And everyone keeps saying, even if the Jazz tank, they won't get a top pick. It's rigged. The NBA will never give it to them. It's they're the way that the lottery balls fall, the ping pong balls fall, they're never going to get that top pick. Well, to even have at least a 10% chance at the number one pick, you have to finish in the bottom five in the NBA standings. So just to give yourself a shot, you have to be bottom five. And the Utah Jazz have only finished in the bottom five twice in the last 20 years. They had the fourth worst record in the NBA in 2005 and the fifth worst record in the NBA in 2014. Those are only two times in the last 20 years. And honestly, actually, the last 40 years, because even if you go back for the best odds, like I mentioned, you have to be bottom three. Bottom three teams all have the same odds to get the number one pick in the NBA draft. The Jazz haven't had a bottom three record since 1982. So yes, I understand what fans are saying. There's still an amount of luck involved, but to put yourself in the best position, you have to lose a certain number of games, and the Jazz just haven't done that over the last several years. When they did do that, when they got to the bottom five, like I mentioned, those 2 years, 2004 or 2005 and 2014, you get a player like Darren Williams. That was in 2005. In 2014, they had the number five pick, and they took Dante Exum, who did not pan out for the Jazz, but that's what happens in the draft sometimes. It doesn't, not every pick pans out. However, they only had the fifth worst odds there. So if you get into the bottom three, you give yourself the best shot at the best player, which many people would agree in this draft is Cooper Flagg. And fun fact for you there, like I mentioned, last time the Jazz had a bottom three record was at 1982. Guess who the Jazz drafted that year with the second overall pick? Dominique Wilkins, the human highlight film. And they traded him away before he even played a game for the Utah Jazz. This guy goes on to be Hall of Famer, top 75 player in NBA history. Um, They traded him because they wanted him to change positions, play a position he did not want to play, and so he didn't want to come to Utah for that reason. And according to the Wikipedia article, at least the Jazz were cash strapped at that time, traded him for a couple players and $1 million in cash. So hate to bring this kind of thing up, but they have been in this position before where they were able to get this type of generational player, a Hall of Fame type player. They weren't able to figure it out then. The hope is this time, if the Jazz put themselves in a position to get a top three pick, bottom three record, which they currently are, 0-6, worst record in the league. Keep going. You give yourself a best shot at a player of that caliber. A player like a John Stockton and Karl Malone, like a Darren Williams, and possibly even better, Cooper Flagg, and other players in this draft are seen as very solid. This scene is a very deep draft and a very, very talented draft. So the Jazz are doing the right thing in my eyes at this point, but set themselves up to get a star type player to pair along with Larry Markkinen, with the Colin Sexton, Keontae George, whoever it is that ends up panning out for this team. So Jazz fans, don't lose hope quite yet. I had to go through this with San Antonio Spurs. They were tied for, best odds, worst record in the league. And they ended up, they were bottom three and they got number one and they got Victor Wembanyama. So you get bottom three, you see how the dice roll. At the worst, you probably get the third pick, which is still a really, really good player. But you give yourself a good shot at getting the number one pick as well. So sacrifices must be made. Here we are in basketball season. It should be an exciting one. Yeah, even if the Jazz aren't winning, hey, maybe your college team is winning some games, and you'll even have some NBA prospects to watch here in the state of Utah, like I mentioned, with a couple guys down at BYU. So, hope you guys enjoy this one. Enjoy some basketball this week. Enjoy the holy war between BYU and Utah, and we'll see you guys next week.